When I start out, I sell a property. As long as I defer the tax, I get to make the money on it. So whether it's 2 days or whether it's 30 years.
Welcome to the Freedom Point Real Estate Podcast, where we talk about creating more time freedom through passive real estate investing. Passive investing in real estate challenges conventional investment wisdom. We are passionate about learning and sharing resources with others who are ready to transform their investing mindset. Quick disclaimer as always, I am not a CPA, I am not an attorney or a financial advisor. This is not financial advice, not telling you or anyone else what to do. The views and opinions expressed in these podcasts are provided for education and informational purposes only and are not necessarily the views of my employer, ADP. I'm glad you're here. Now let's dig in. All right, welcome back, Freedom Point Podcast listeners. Thanks again for jumping into another episode of the Freedom Point. I am your host, Jeremy Dyer, and with me today, I have Dave Foster. Dave, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Jeremy. It's great to be here today.
Yeah, and thank you again for joining the conversation today. I will say that the topic of the day is 1031 exchange. And for those that are listening to the episode today, I can almost assure you that Dave's going to bring a tremendous amount of value. It is one of the topics that I get asked a lot from investors and potential investors is they want to learn about the 1031 exchange and how it can particularly benefit themselves. So Dave is the founder and CEO of the 1031 Investor. Dave is a qualified intermediary investment professional. He understands that real estate is an investment in your future. And as a multi-industry visionary, he has over 20 years of experience working in all phases of real estate investing. Dave, what did I miss out?
You could have just said Dave has ADD and loves real estate.
Well, we both have that in common. So thank you.
That's awesome.
Well, what else can we know about Dave in terms of what you're currently up to, what you're currently focused on? I have a fantastic book, by the way. My listening audience that is watching this can see the name of the book is called Lifetime Tax-Free Wealth, and it's the Real Estate Investor's Guide to the 1031 Exchange. For those that haven't read this book, highly recommended if you want to learn more about 1031 exchanges. But outside of the fact that you're an author and you wrote a fantastic book on 1031 exchanges, what else can you tell us about yourself outside of your ADD?
There is no birthing process as tough as writing a book. Oh my goodness. But we just got done with that. So I'm still kind of breathing a sigh of relief. What has been really fun is to finish that book and then realize that what I actually did was not so much to write a how-to manual, because, oh my gosh, we would put every listener to sleep in the world if we just talked like an accountant about taxes and 1031s. But instead, the 1031 exchange, the way that it kind of morphed as I was writing about it, turned into more of a roadmap for how to find out how to reach your dream or your end goal, whatever it is. Every roadmap has what? Turns, twists, options. And there are ways to use this really obscure part of the tax code to massively benefit you. And so it was really fun to kind of see the book pour that out because it all comes really from the basis of the first mistake I ever made in real estate. Can you guess which one it was?
No.
First of all, it was my first transaction. How's that for screwing up big, right? And there's the learning curve, right? We always talk about the rookie tax. Whether you're wanting to start a career as maybe a fix and flipper, or you're wanting to become a builder, or you're wanting to start renting properties to tenants, when you start out, there's a rookie tax that you will pay. Everybody does. My rookie tax was my wife and I were in Denver, Colorado, and we wanted to go live on a sailboat. We had just had our first child. We said, oh my gosh, the most important commodity you've got is time. So how can we maximize time? And we said, well, we need to get off this corporate wagon. So how do we do that? Oh, let's go buy a sailboat. It'll be easy, she said. It'll be cheap, he said. My wife, as you and I were talking before the show, my wife's a Minnesota City girl. I grew up on a farm in Kansas. We met in Denver, Colorado. Do you hear or see any ocean yet? What were we thinking? For some reason, Jacques Cousteau captivated us and we wanted to do that. So, the best way to be able to buy the sailboat, we figured, like a whole lot of people throughout history, is let's go into real estate. Because there are, from my looking at the world, there's two groups of people that have always ruled it. Always. And that is the banks throughout history and the landlords. And I'm too lazy and dumb to start a bank. So I said, let's go into real estate and become a landlord. So that's what we did. And my first mistake was I bought a duplex, I fixed it up, I made a ton of money when I sold it. And then my accountant said, Dave, you need $30,000 to pay the tax on it this year. Ouch. That's going to slow up our 10-year goal quite a bit if I have to
Yeah.
keep feeding my silent partner, Uncle Sam.
Right.
So, and what was really sad, Jeremy, was just a couple weeks ago, I had the chance to sit down and just take a breath and think about some things. And I went back to that mistake. And I realized that if the tax was $30,000 30 years ago, and if I would have been able to invest that for myself at 10% modest return, I would have made over $100,000
Yeah,
by this time
absolutely.
right now. That's $100,000 mistake. So when I make mistakes, I make them big. I didn't realize how big it was at the time. And that's when we discovered the 1031 exchange.
Yeah, let's unpack the 1031.
Yeah.
I actually think there's quite a few people listening to this that, maybe they've heard 1031, but they don't really know what it is and how it can benefit them.
So on that very first sale, if instead of simply selling the property and then having the tax, I would have used the process of the 1031 exchange and then gone and bought other investment real estate. Now, because I was in a growth mode, I would have probably bought two properties and done the exact same thing.
Mhm.
And if I would have done that, the IRS would have let me keep that $30,000 to buy more real estate with. And I get to make the money off of that. And then when I sell those properties, I 1031 again. And every time the IRS lets you keep the money for yours. So by the time you get a few years into it, you're making a ton of money simply because you didn't pay the tax and the IRS is letting you keep it.
So let's just say this, for example. So, say you've got an investment that you make in real estate. I guess it could be an active real estate investment, or perhaps maybe a passive real estate investment as a limited partner. Let's say the investor puts in $100,000, and in 5 years they walk away with their original $100,000 plus $100,000 in profit. Are you saying that the 1031 exchange strategy would allow that investor to take their original capital plus their profit and deploy it into the next real estate investment opportunity and not pay any taxes on that profit?
Yeah, that's exactly right. Now, there's one caveat in there, and that is that the 1031 exchange has to be a sale of actual real estate. So a lot of today's syndications will not work because what you own is not real estate. You own an interest in an entity that owns real estate. But there are some things like the Delaware Statutory Trust, which acts like an actual ownership of real estate. Or let's say that it was a small house that you bought for 100,000 and then you sold for 200,000 like you said. You could sell that property for 200,000 and then use the proceeds say as down payments to go buy two more $200,000 properties or $100,000 properties, I'm sorry. As long as you purchase at least as much as you sell and use all the proceeds to do it, the IRS lets you keep all the tax with you.
Is there something such as what's known as a depreciation recapture that the investor might need to take into consideration, or is there no recapture through a 1031?
Well, recapture is a big deal, isn't it? Because it's that pretend gift that the government gives you. They say, we're going to let you pretend your property is losing value every year. So you get that as a write off on your taxes. Now, you and I both are very familiar with the internal rate of return calculation, which is huge People that rent real estate have to know this because you're not just making money off of the income that's coming in each month. The internal rate of return calculates that plus the appreciation that you're getting while you hold the property, plus the amortization of the loan. That means when you have a loan on a property, the tenant is paying that back. And a part of that payment every month is a return of your capital. So that's like real money to you. And then the last calculation in the internal rate of return is depreciation. So you get that as an annual write off every year. But when you sell the property, the IRS, in a very nasty gram way, wants you to pay that back. But when you do a 1031 exchange, you get to defer that forward as well.
Does it get deferred indefinitely? Does the basis change when the individual passes away? What does that look like?
Yeah, so I like to use the word indefinitely for this reason, because there's four pillar D's of 1031 investing. The first one, of course, would be to defer, because when I start out, I sell a property. As long as I defer the tax, I get to make the money on it. So whether it's 2 days or whether it's 30 years, I get to make the money. So that's the first motivation. The second D is defer. Because no matter where you're at in a real estate cycle, the 1031 exchange can accommodate that. So everybody who comes to me and says, well, Dave, you got to pay the tax anyway, so why not pay it now? Well, because I'm going to show you how you don't have to. So that's why I like indefinitely. So how many people in Palo Alto sold their San Francisco properties at huge profits because of that appreciation 10 years ago? And what did they do? They did 1031 exchanges and followed this guy named Elon down to Austin, where they bought cheap. And what's happened to Austin ever since? So maybe you're chasing from areas where it's been a high appreciation to now where it's going to start popping off. Or maybe it's the part of a real estate cycle where appreciation's slowing down. And it's time to go buy those properties maybe in the Rust Belt where it's better cash flow. Or maybe it's the part of the real estate cycle where residential's cooling off and commercial or industrial is still hot. The 1031 lets you exchange from anywhere in the country to anywhere in the country, from any type of property to any type of property. So it will accommodate whatever it is that you're wanting to buy at a given point in the real estate cycle. So the first D is defer because it's indefinite. The second D lets you keep it indefinite through a cycle. That's defer. What do you think the third D is?
I'm going to go with defer, Dave.
Yeah, because not only will the 1031 exchange accommodate a real estate cycle wherever it's at, it can accommodate your personal life cycle as a real estate investor. I don't know about you, but when I started out, I had way more energy than I had brains or money. So I took advantage of that. I leapt at properties that I probably shouldn't have gotten, and then I used my energy to make them work. Well, as time went on, I started to get a little more money and a little less energy and started to shift into projects that would manage themselves for me. I started to move from smaller into larger. I started to move from multiple properties into fewer properties, all to accommodate my changing needs as a person. Now, retirement is also part of that. Because if I'm going to use the word indefinitely, we got to make it indefinite. So let's say that you've got someone in Cincinnati that's going to retire, and they've got a portfolio and they want to manage it in retirement. So ahead of time, they 1031 their portfolio down to Sarasota, Florida, so that when they're ready to retire, they sell their home in Cincinnati, they move down to Florida. their portfolio waits for them. And they didn't have to pay a penny in tax. That's pretty huge. But can we throw some gasoline on this fire real quick?
Let's
I'm going
do
to
it.
take a step back, if that's okay, and talk about Section 121, which is your primary residence rules. If you sell a property you live in for, excuse me, for 2 out of the 5 years prior to selling it, then you get to take, if you're married, the first $500,000 of profit tax free. So that couple in Cincinnati can sell that house. All of that money is tax free. That's a great way to start retirement, isn't it?
Sure is.
But here's where it combines with 1031. There is nothing wrong with converting an investment property to your primary residence at any time. So rather than spending their tax free money to go buy a new property, why don't they just convert one of their nice properties into their next primary residence? So no tax. As long as they live in it, no tax. And if they live in it long enough so that they have owned it for 5 years and they've lived in it for at least 2 out of 5, then they will get a portion of that gain tax free for every year they've lived in it. So if you rent it for 2 years, live in it for 3, and sell it, you get 60% of the gain, all that deferred gain, tax free. Wait, you mean I don't always have to pay it? That's pretty huge, isn't it? And if I lived in it for 8 years, I would get 80% of the gain tax free. You do have to still recapture depreciation. So you got to watch out for that. But how many ways we can keep deferring it throughout our life? We can retire and start to convert properties and eliminate some of the tax that way. And you're going to tell me what the fourth D is, but be careful because you mentioned it right when we started this section, and it's not defer, but it starts with D. What do you think it is?
Yeah, I'm going to say it's death.
Man, it ain't my favorite topic, but we're all heading there. When you die, your heirs get a step up in basis so that they inherit your properties if they paid market value on the day you died. So all of that depreciation over the years, all of that gain that was deferred throughout the years is legally eliminated. And your heirs get this incredible legacy wealth building gift of tax free real estate to start their own lives with. So defer, 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 and die. Do you have to pay the tax someday? I don't think so.
Yeah, no, that's definitely the definition of generational wealth building for sure. So I know that in order to execute a 1031 exchange, that it requires an intermediary. Can you speak a little bit more about what an intermediary is and what their role and purpose is in that transaction?
Yeah, the IRS is very scared that you're not going to do your paperwork right or you're going to take the money and do something not right with it. So they require that as part of a 1031 exchange that you use in the services of an unrelated third party whose only role can be documenting the 1031 exchange and holding the proceeds in between your sale and purchase. That's people like us. So my firm, we're all accountants and attorneys. We don't do taxes. We don't write wills. All we do are 1031 exchanges. But you have to, people say, well, that seems weird. Why do I have to do that? And especially because we have to be unrelated in all other ways. You can't have your banker who you trust do your 1031 exchange. So everybody says, well, that's really weird. And what you have to do is go back to the way the law changed in 1996 when the IRS lost. Yes, the IRS lost this massive court case. They were not so happy, Jeremy. So what they did was they said, well, fine. We got to let you do 1031s, but we don't have to make it easy for you. So
Mhm.
that's what the qualified intermediary does. The single most important thing to know is that they have to be involved prior to the closing of your sale.
Mhm.
If you call me up a week after you close your sale and say, I'm ready to
Too
do my
late.
1031, I'll cry a tear with you, but you're not because it's passed.
So, what are those eligibility requirements? So, say I've got a passive investment that I'm in, or I've got some active real estate that I'm looking to exit from. How many days in advance do I need to employ, somebody like Dave Foster to help me execute the 1031 exchange?
That's really going to be a flexible question that's dependent upon the professionals that you're using because the title company is going to be impacted a little bit and the qualified intermediary has got to be able to prepare it. Now, I've heard horror stories of people who call QIs and they say it's going to take us 2 or 3 weeks. I don't know. My personal world's record is 22 minutes. I just don't think it's that tough to get them set up. And we've been doing them now for about 25 years. So, but as long as it is in time so that the title company or the closing attorney can have the documents reflected as part of the closing package, that's all we need. But sooner rather than later to facilitate planning.
Right. Are there any other eligibility requirements that the investor needs to be made aware of when they're entering into that time period where they know they're going to exit out of either active real estate or passive real estate, that they should be aware of?
Oh yeah, that the dreaded time periods. So there's 6 requirements that all have to be met. And we've kind of talked about several of them already, that it's got to be actual real estate you own. So you have to be on the deed for the real estate. From that date of closing, you've got only 45 more days to find your new property and identify it. That can really put a lot of stress on it. So when you're leading up to your sale, I always tell people you need to be shopping before your old property closes. And as a matter of fact, if you can get your new property under contract before your old property closes, that's perfect. We just have to close the sale before we close the purchase. Now, you've got a total of 180 days to finish the purchase. That's not such a big deal. But those 45 days will sneak up on you real quick.
If I'm an investor in a passive real estate investment opportunity and I know that the sponsor is looking to exit out of that investment, okay, I have to then, within 45 days of that exit, have already identified the next investment where that money is going to go into. And then that money needs to be in that specific investment within 180 days of that. Am I saying that correctly?
That is correct. But just remember that if you're a passive investor in a limited partnership syndication, you don't own real estate. So that very first requirement, you lose your 1031. The only way to work it with the syndication is if the syndicator will allow you to actually buy a piece of the property so that you own maybe 1% of the property and the syndication LP owns the other 99%. Then when it is sold, that's when you can start the 1031. And from that date, you're right. You've only got 45 more days to identify what you're going to go into, total of 180 to complete it.
Yeah. So a lot of investors that I'm aware of do invest with sponsors that do allow 1031 exchange money to come into their deals, as well as some will even assist investors in a 1031 exchange strategy with real estate investment properties that the sponsor team themselves own, and they're looking to, exit out of property A and deploy that capital into new property B, right? However, one of the challenges that a lot of investors encounter is that sponsors have minimums. Okay, oftentimes the minimum to execute a 1031 exchange could be anywhere from 500,000 to a million, and not every investor has 7 figures in 1031 money that they would be able to execute, but they still want to take advantage of the 1031 exchange. So, what advice would you have for those individuals?
Have I got an idea for you? And it's one that we started executing several years ago because there are a crate of awesome syndications out there. And that's what they love to do. Remember, I'm lazy and stupid. So I want to use these bright, energetic people. But when I'm doing a 1031 exchange, I don't have $1 million to put into it. So here's how you can combine that as a 1031 investor. So you sell a property that generates a lot of cash, and then you use your proceeds and allocate them to go buy two properties. So let's say I sold for $500,000. I go buy one property for $300,000 free and clear. Um, Actually, let me change the model here. It's a $500,000 sale, Jeremy, and there is $200,000 of debt. So I walk out with $300,000 in cash. And according to the reinvestment requirements, I have to purchase at least $500,000 in real estate. Make sense? So I'm going to buy two properties. I'm going to buy one property for $250,000 free and clear. And then I'm going to take the other 50,000 and I'm going to use that as a down payment on another $250,000 property. So at the end of the day, did I purchase at least as much as I sold? Yep. So I fully deferred the tax in the 1031. But what do I have? A free and clear property over here for $250,000. And I want to invest in a good syndication. What I do then is I refinance that property. I pull the cash out and then I invest that cash with the syndication. Now, I may only be able to pull out a couple 100,000, but remember, because I'm not 1031ing, almost every syndicator would love to see a guy with 200,000 in cash. So that's how I can do that. So I keep the 1031 going. I have multiple properties. My tenants are paying the mortgage, and I just was able to take cash and reinvest it in a syndication. And what that does is it just continues to diversify me. So I have loved that model for us.
Question for you. I've heard the term lazy 1031 thrown around. Can you explain for our audience the difference between a 1031 exchange and a lazy 1031?
Yeah, you would think it would be something I love, but it's not. It's not. So they call it that because it has the immediate effect of offsetting the recapture of depreciation that you would have if you don't do a 1031. So remember, if I don't do a 1031, I got to pay my 1030 my depreciation recapture. But if I don't do the 1031, then I can take all that cash and I can invest that into a syndication. So that's what they're trying to get you to do, is to make it able for you to invest in the syndication with as little financial harm as possible. So what they will do is they will say, don't do the 1031. Invest in our syndication, and we will do a cost segregation study and take advantage of bonus depreciation year one. So the depreciation you have to recapture from the sale of your property is going to be offset by the extra depreciation that you're going to get by investing in our project. Sounds cool, right? Okay. Why wouldn't I want to do that? You might, depending on your personal situation. But the thing you've got to understand and take into account is that once you go that route, there is no going back. You will pay that depreciation. Now, they deferred it one more time into their project, but when their project sells, you will pay that depreciation. So you're only
Yeah.
deferring it as long as that syndication lasts.
Yeah. So eventually it's going to catch up to you.
Exactly. Now they'll say, well, that's fine. Go buy another one of ours. We'll keep it going. But by that time, you're kind of a slave as opposed to being able to 1031 it wherever you want.
Yeah. That makes sense. That makes sense. So Dave, share maybe one or two maybe case studies with our audience where you've seen investors really benefit tremendously as a direct result of the 1031 exchange strategy.
So one of my favorite clients was a guy named Johnny Q. He's in the book, and he was a Navy guy. Now, we don't pay them nearly what they're worth, trust me. But at every service station he was at, duty station, he would purchase a house and then he would rent it to roommates while he lived in it. Well, that was a great way of starting his wealth. Over the course of a 25-year career, he had houses that were scattered everywhere. And what he started to do was to 1031 them into a central location in Virginia that was going to be his last posting station. So slowly over time, he took houses in San Diego and Washington, Connecticut, Texas, and moved them all to be around him in Washington. And then he decided, you know what? I think I'll become a realtor. So he became a realtor so that he instantly had his own stockpile of listings to start a real estate career. It was a beautiful way of transitioning for him.
Yeah, that's a great story. Any other similar or related ones like that? I mean, what's a typical investor of yours? What's kind of their typical out of the gate investment strategy, and what's worked well for them?
The most common investor out there right now is the accidental investor. We are getting married, statistics tell us, later and later in life. We all have jobs before that. So typically, when two people get married, they're joining two households and two houses. Well, they're only going to live in one. So guess what? They just became an investor by accident. Now, a couple years goes by. By the way, which house do you think they moved into?
The next one.
No, they moved into hers because it was the one that
Oh,
was clean.
yeah, right. Of course.
So after a couple years of this rental income, that feels pretty good, doesn't it? So now they say, you know what? We'd like to keep doing this. So they will sell that house, but they'll use the proceeds to buy two properties. And the reason for that is that lets you take advantage of rents per square foot. A $100,000 house might generate $1,000 a month in rent, but a $200,000 house might only generate $1,700 a month in rent. So you buy two of the cheaper houses, and then they just keep doing that over time until one day they wake up and they go, "Man, we're tired." Why? Well, it's because you got 20 properties here and you're fielding plumbing calls and renter problems and all kinds of stuff. So, what they will do is they will start to sell four of them to go buy one larger property. Now, this is the time when a lot of people will start to branch out into vacation rentals because they're starting to realize, I want to get a little something for myself. And this 1031 stuff is cool, but what's in it for me? Well, with a vacation rental, you can generate income and you've got a place to go vacation. So they will do that. Or they'll move into commercial, they'll move into multifamily where it can be managed for them. And so it's what I call the ebb and flow of 1031 investing. They grow bigger, then they grow smaller. They go from active to passive. That's pretty much the avatar of the 1031 investor.
Yeah, I've definitely seen that, to be the case in my own life, having been an active investor in the past and then moved, back into the passive side just because I didn't want to deal with the quintessential tenants, trash, toilets, and termites that everybody talks about. Dave, one question for you is, outside of your own book, what would be one other book or maybe even a podcast recommendation that you'd make to the listening audience?
If you've got an old Bible laying around, grab it and read the book of Proverbs. Read a chapter a day. There's 31 chapters. Read a chapter a day for a couple months. There is some amazing business advice in there that if you follow it, you will be successful. So there's another one. I'm going to give a shout out to this book called Whatever Happened to Penny Candy. It's by a guy named Richard Marbury, and it's written at about a eighth or ninth grade level, so I can understand it. But it is the single best primer on inflation's effects on an economy. And boy, do we have need of that wisdom right now. Whatever happened to Penny Candy, Richard Marbury?
Yeah, amen to that. And for those that don't have an old Bible laying around, you can always download an app on your phone, and you can even have the Bible read to you if you prefer in multiple different languages. So, thank you for making that recommendation on the Bible, the best-selling book in history, really.
History.
So, Dave, what are one or two different ways that our listening audience can connect with you to learn more about what you're up to and the 1031 investor?
So you can grab the book, through the normal critters. Amazon's got it and everything. Years ago, when we started this whole nonsense, I looked at the industry. Back in those days, if someone asked us what we did, we just kind of smirked because we'd say we're a qualified intermediary. They say, "What's that?" I say, "Well, if we told you, we'd have to kill you." So, that was really kind of how it started. And we realized that this thing was only going to grow if there were people who could learn about it, and the IRS was not going to teach them. So I created the whole presence as an education presence. And it's as easy as going to the 1031investor.com, where we've got a 47-part YouTube series. We've got consultants to deal with the issues that you're having, to make it personal, calculators where you can discover what your actual liabilities are, make sure that 1031 is something for you. And then, of course, we're that infamous QI who does 1031s for people. But education is key. And so I always tell people, whether you're going to do it next week or not, if you're just starting to think about it, the more planning you can make and use, the more off-ramps there are that will keep the tax deferred and in your pocket.
Yeah, that's great. Dave, I have really appreciated the time that you've spent with us and our listening audience today on the show. We will provide all your contact information as well in the show notes so that our listeners can reach out to you directly to learn more about what you've got going on. Again, really appreciate you being a part of the show today, okay?
It was awesome being here.
All right. And listening audience, thank you so much for joining another episode of the Freedom Point podcast. We look forward to having you join us on the next episode.
Thank you for hanging out with us today and for listening to the Freedom Point podcast, powered by Starting Point Capital. This show is for entertainment purposes only. Nothing said on this show should be considered financial advice. Before making any financial decision, please consult with a professional. This show is copyrighted by the Freedom Point podcast. Written permissions must be granted before syndication or rebroadcasting. If you're interested in connecting, you can find contact information at startingpointcapital.com.